So it's a good time to be a Devastator, but a very bad time to be a Whirlwind or a Thunderfire Cannon. Today we're looking at the Space Marine heavy support choices, what's gone up, what's gone down, and what's going to be good in the new edition. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. Today we're continuing our series looking at the new Space Marine points changes, and we reach the big guns of the army in the heavy support. Quite a lot of the most commonly run competitive units for Space Marines were found here in 8th, whether that's Eliminators, Thunderfire Cannons, Whirlwinds, Grav Devastators, or Devastator Centurions. In this video we'll take a look at the absolute and percentage points changes compared with previous, talk through each unit and whether or not I think they're going to be good in the new edition, and then look through a few of the heavy weapon changes that are applicable to these vehicles. Let's jump straight into it. So let's start with the Devastator Centurions then. Dev Cents have gone up from 40 to 60 points, and while their heavy bolters have stayed the same on infantry, Hurricane bolters have gone up by 5 points as well. This means that your standard Imperial Fist heavy bolter Hurricane bolter Centurion has gone up from 70 to 95, which is really quite a hefty nerf. It's a 36% points increase, which is far worse for the average in the field. They're still not terrible in terms of points per damage output, but they're just really quite fragile point for point now. 95 points could buy you a light tank elsewhere, so only having 4 toughness 5 wounds just really isn't all that great point for point. The Centurion missile launcher and las cannon both came down in points though, which means that despite the Dev Centurions going up, they're actually going to be a little bit cheaper, going down 5 points for a relative percentage change of minus 5%. Las cannons are certainly looking a lot more attractive on these guys now, and the longer range of these weapons might actually encourage people to take them a bit more, as they'll be able to hang back in the deployment zone, and hopefully remain out of range from a lot of enemy reprisals. Actually dropping in points while a lot of things have gone up is a really quite decent buff comparatively. For some reason I managed to forget to put the Grav version of the Centurions on here. Centurions with a Grav Cannon and Amp plus a Hurricane Bolter used to be 70 points, and they've now gone up to 85, somewhat mitigated because the Grav Cannon dropped to just 10 points on infantry. So that's plus 15 points or plus 21%, so probably a minor nerf compared with other options. For Centurions I now expect to see heavy bolters taken less, with more people opting to go Grav Cannons or las cannons. If we move on to the standard Space Marine Devastator squad, things are really looking up for these guys compared with other options, very much bucking the trends that a lot of people were commenting on of the non-Primaris Space Marine units going up in points where Primaris going down. The individual Devastator Marines did go up by 2 points from 13 to 15, but barring the heavy bolter, every single one of their other heavy weapons went down, sometimes significantly. Probably the biggest standout winner is the Grav Cannon, which as we said went down from 20 to 10 points, meaning that a squad of 4 Grav Cannon armed Devastators will now only cost you 145 points, which is a 21% drop on previous. This is just a crazy buff combined with the fact that everything else is going up in points, so it's so much better of a buff. Plus these guys were already taken competitively anyway. You could pack 4 of them into a pod and then use that Grav amplification stratagem, and you'd be pretty much guaranteed to do hefty damage to near any target in the game. They were good before, and they certainly look absolutely great now. I expect to see them run a lot. Las cannons on infantry also got a very similar points buff. A squad of 5 with 4 las cannons has gone down 18% compared with previous, and they're looking very attractive again compared with other ranged anti-tank platforms. Devastators certainly have a good advantage in the Signum and the Armorium Cherub. 3 squads of these could really be an annoying thing to deal with right from the start of the game, and do a lot of damage to enemy armour I think. Missile launchers also went down a little bit, bear in mind their frag missiles gain the blast special rule, so they'll now be pretty decent at anti-horde as well as anti-tank. Again, certainly loads more fieldable than they were before. Heavy bolters stayed the same, so the squad sort of increased in line with what it was before. Still not particularly overwhelming in my mind, unless they've changed the heavy bolter in some way. Plasma cannons dropped from 16 to 15 points on infantry, meaning that a base squad of 5 Devastators with 4 plasma cannons has gone up 6 points or 5%, which again is lower than most other things, so a relative buff. Plasma cannons also gained the blast special rule, which is going to be excellent for having them chew through either hordes or big squads of elite infantry, and if they do gain that overcharging only on unmodified ones, then they're just going to be a solidly better choice. I already did really quite like Plasma Devastators before, and that certainly seems to have only got better in 9th edition. Finally, the multi-melters have dropped a little bit, but not a lot. The squad's essentially 2 points up compared with previously, which is a relative buff, but I'm not sure it's enough to make the multi-melter compete with the las cannons, which now cost less. To me, las cannons just seem better than multi-melters, so I'm not sure why you go for the multi-melter over the las cannon. Overall, Devastators are certainly looking better than they were, and I think it's going to be even more common than it was now to run 4 Grav Devastators in a drop pod, and use that gravitic amplification stratagem to melt all your enemies. Las cannons, missile launchers and plasma cannons are also looking really decent. Moving on, we come to Eliminators, who in my opinion the Bolt Sniper version were one of the most undercosted units in the game. I'm afraid they have caught a relatively bad nerf, going up 29%. Basically the Eliminators themselves have gone up from 18 to 28, but their Bolt Sniper rifles have become free, and I've assumed that the Camo Cloak will be staying the same at 3 points, but it could be maybe 2 points or 4 or something. So with an estimate of 31 points per model, that would mean that a squad of them would now cost you 93 points. Honestly, I don't think it's that bad of a nerf, and I think they'll still be very usable, as they were some of the best all-round firepower in the game, never mind their prodigious character hunting abilities, but I feel their Bolt Snipers are now brought in a bit more in line with the other options. The last fusils are now 10 points more than the Bolt Sniper rifle, so they haven't gone up quite as much in comparison. It's a 14% percentage change, which seems to be about par for the course, so pretty much similar to how they are now. If you like last fusel Eliminators in 8th, then they're pretty much the same in 9th. Hellblasters have received a relative buff in 9th edition. They're just another one of the units where Games Workshop has folded their points cost into the actual model rather than having to pay separately for the guns. Now all the Hellblasters will cost you just 33 points. You don't have to pay extra for the heavy version anymore, which makes a lot of sense because I think it was actually worse than the rapid fire version personally. Other than that, essentially completely unchanged, so not going up any points at all is actually a relative buff compared with everything else, as most other things in the game tend to be going up between 10 and 20%. Again, if the plasma change is farmed out to them, then only overheating on unmodified ones will certainly benefit them. Next we come to the Hunter and Stalker, both of whom have received a bit of a points hike, likely reflective of the vehicle changes in 9th edition. They've both gone up 20 points, the Hunter is now 95 and the Stalker is now 115, which is a change of 27% and 21% respectively. I think it's not too surprising that a fair few vehicles have gone up a decent amount. You'll be able to move these guys and fire their heavy weapons for no movement and shooting penalty, and if you do get tagged in close combat, then you can shoot the enemy unit that tagged you. I still think despite that this is a bit of a nerf on both of those tanks, and I'm honestly not too surprised that it happened really. Paying just 75 points for what basically had the profile of a Lehman Russ with toughness 8 really was a bit silly to be honest. Though the Hunter is in a bit of a weird place, its missile is a little bit underwhelming in terms of damage output because it's only one shot, so these tanks are only going to be all that efficient at dedicated anti-air or just being defensive bricks in the battle line now rather than being more general all-purpose tanks. The Land Raider variants on the other hand have both profited from the change in the rules and also have only gone up in points a very small amount. The standard Land Raider has gone down in points slightly, although its twin heavy bolter has gone up in points by 13, so it is a bit balanced, overall leading it to be plus 8 points to 285 or plus 3%. Again, these guys are just going to absolutely love shooting things in close combat. It means they can be a lot more bold without having to worry quite so much about just being tagged, as at least they'll still be able to deal at least some damage. I honestly think that rule might be a better change for the Crusader and Redeemer to be honest, particularly the Redeemer who will really enjoy being able to flame away with those massive flamestorm cannons while in melee. There's not really much that wants to be getting in the way of them. I believe that Games Workshop will be changing Power of the Machine Spirits to work in a different way. At the moment it just ignores the movement penalty for moving and shooting heavy weapons, which all vehicles are going to get anyway from now on. It looks like they'll be getting some sort of mystery buff in the future, so I guess we can only hope it's something useful. The Predator was certainly a tank that needed some love in 9th edition. It's just been consistently mathematically poor compared with the other gun platforms in 8th. Again, it'll be a big beneficiary of being able to move and shoot with no penalty, and also firing in close combat, seeing as none of its weapons are blast. The Predator autocannon and twin lascannon have stayed the same at 40 points each. Sponson lascannons have dropped down from 25 to 20 points, and Sponson heavy bolters have randomly gone up 5 points from 10 to 15. The base chassis has gone up very slightly from 85 to 90 points, which means that the autocannon heavy bolter Predator has gone up 15, so that's plus 10%. Pretty in line with the rest of the points changes, and probably a slight buff when taking into account the shooting in close combat and moving things. The quad las Predator has dropped by 3% though, it's gone down 5 points to 170 points. Definitely a much needed buff to its functioning there. I think now it's going to compete a fair bit better against things like the Repulsor Executioner and maybe some of the Forge World Dreadnoughts, although of course we're going to have to wait to see exactly how they change. The autocannon and heavy bolter Predator though remains a bit underwhelming in my eyes. The Vindicator's got away with a fairly small points increase in my opinion. Being able to move and fire for no penalty whatsoever is a really big deal for this guy, as of course he'll need to be moving most of the time to get close. Getting blast on that Demolisher cannon is certainly no bad thing either. He's going to be pretty effective against most targets now, at least doing a flat 6 damage against large units if he is forced to fire at such. He's still very much going to have to be screened though, as of course he can't fire blast weapons in close combat. Possibly one of the biggest losers out of the heavy support section is the Whirlwind. Both the Castellan and Vengeance round patterns of the Whirlwind have received enormous points increases. The Whirlwind base chassis going up by almost double the points from 65 to 125. I think it's hard to deny that the Whirlwind is benefiting from 9th edition changes in multiple ways, moving and firing with vehicles, gaining the blast keyword on its missiles, and also more line of sight blocking terrain makes the Whirlwind quite a lot stronger. However, I'm just really not sure it's strong enough to justify that enormous percentage increase. It's gone up by well over 50% on both its variants. Its damage output wasn't terrible before, but it wasn't exactly stellar either. I still very much saw it as a slight luxury for buying ignores line of sight firepower, and I'm honestly not convinced it's going to be worth the investment when you're paying this much for it. I suspect making do with more direct firepower weapons is going to be a little bit of a better strategy. Next we come to the Repulsor Executioner, which has gone up on its base cost from 215 to 250 points. A bunch of its guns have changed very slightly in value, which we'll get onto in a second, including the Macroplasma Incinerator dropping 1 point from 31 to 30. Overall, its points increase is pretty much in line with everything else, going up 13%, although it's arguably copped a bit of a nerf by not being able to fall back and shoot with the fly keyword anymore. It still will be able to fire in close combat with a lot of its weapons, but in reality I still think that's a nerf compared with not being able to fall back and shoot. Again, it did have power of the Machine Spirit before, so it might be interesting to see where that goes in 9th. I still think it's very usable though, it's certainly not been nerfed too hard. Finally we get onto the Thunderfire Cannon, who similar to the Whirlwind has also seen a massive points hike. Once you've accounted for the Tech Marine Gunner and his war gear, Thunderfire Cannons have jumped from 92 points to 140, going up a massive 48 points or 52% increase. Again, it's gained a few things, particularly the blast keyword, giving it a flat 12 shots against any hordes that are 11 or more in strength. Should anyone be running those in 9th edition, that is. And also I believe as a vehicle it can weirdly shovel 3 inches every single turn now for no penalty whatsoever. In general though, its firepower has been heavily hit. I think that you might be more likely to see Thunderfire Cannons in lists now more as just a single one to provide tremor shells, and do a bit of messing with enemy movement, rather than every second Space Marine list taking 3 of them now. I think they are still usable in a more limited role, but I think that people will be tempted more by other options rather than spamming 3. Finally, let's just have a quick look at some of the heavy weapon changes for the Marines, some of the ones that particularly relate to the choices in the heavy support slots. I must say I found the heavy bolter changes rather interesting. The heavy bolter's gone up to 15 points on vehicles, and the twin heavy bolters for some reason jumped a massive 13 points, going from 17 points to 30. To be honest, I don't think heavy bolters were particularly spammed before in any big way, so I'm a little bit confused by these changes myself. It kind of makes me wonder if they might be doing something a bit radical like giving the heavy bolter 4 shots or something. I guess we can only dare to dream. If not, they've certainly become a lot less viable than they were before. Las cannons have changed from 25 points to either 15 on infantry or 20 on vehicles, which is a buff either way, and the twin las cannons on vehicles remain 40. Hurricane bolters have gone up from 10 points to 15 points, which I think honestly is a bit more fair for what they do. I think they were really undercosted at 10 points, basically putting out the firepower of an entire squad of tactical marines. I think 15 seems a little bit more balanced personally. The twin assault cannon on things like the Crusader and Redeemer has dropped a little bit, going down to 40 from 44. And hunter-killer missiles have dropped from 6 to 5 points, so they're a little bit more viable, and storm bolters have increased from 2 to 3, so a little bit more of an investment if you want to stick them on your tanks. Personally, I still think that the storm bolter is very worth it. Again, putting out 2 Space Marines firepower for the cost of 3 points really isn't a bad deal. The repulsor has had a fair few of its guns changed slightly. As we said, the Macroplasma Incinerator has gone down a point, but Fragstorm grenade launchers have gone up a point from 4 to 5, maybe due to gaining the blast keyword. The twin Icarus Iron Hail Heavy Stubber on the other hand has dropped to 0, which makes it pretty solid on the Impulsor with that loadout now. And the optional extras on the Repulsor Executioner, that Icarus Pod and the Iron Hail Heavy Stubber, have both gone down 1 point. For me they were pretty much auto-includes already at the points cost they were at, but now going down a point each, I see no reason to leave them off. So overall, really quite a few changes for the Space Marine Heavy Support section. I think it really is going to shift up people's choices. For the most part, I think the options have tended to get more balanced with these changes, although I do think that the Whirlwinds and Thunderfire Cannons have been hit to the extent where they might not be seen anywhere near as much, and the already good Grav Devastators in a drop pod look like they could be really strong now. Otherwise, to most of the other changes I'm very happy with. Hellblasters getting a relative buff is no bad thing. Same for Missile and Las Cannon Devastators, and Predators with Las Cannons. Vindicators and Land Raiders also have gained a lot going into 9th edition, and some small nerfs to Devastator Centurions and Eliminators seemed fairly reasonable. So let me know what you think of the changes down in the comments below, and if it's going to change what you take in your list or not. Also, if I have made any errors or omissions in this, then of course give me any corrections. There were quite a lot of numbers to process in this video. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. We'll certainly be back for a dedicated transports and flyers review for the Space Marines in the near future, and going over the changes in a bit more depth once all the points are released. If you've been enjoying my videos or finding them particularly useful, then any support on the channel's Patreon page is very much appreciated. It is what allows me the time to make all of these videos happen, even when they take a lot of adding up of numbers. Channel patrons get to see videos early on the channel regularly. There's regular polls to see what sort of videos come next, and you also get entered in the Auspex Tactics prize draw, where this month we're giving away 3 copies of the Indomitors box set. So if any of that sounds good, or you'd just like to help support the channel, the Patreon link is down in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.